This is the Mechanical Care Forum, and it's season 14, the season we're capitalizing on the natural happenings of the day. We're chewing the fat on things related to mechanical assessment and patient treatment in the musculoskeletal therapy space with special guests on the ride home. Today we're joined by Jonathan Strychasz, discussing employer-sponsored healthcare, meeting the patient where they are, and being a servant leader. All this on the ride home. Today on MCF. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast for season 14. There have been several occasions in my career where I've had the opportunity to spend some time with very talented clinicians. I'm referring to times where I've sat down with a colleague at the end of the day or at the end of a patient encounter discussing the situation. I've also had a chance to travel with some pretty amazing mechanically trained therapists on one of our humanitarian efforts in Peru and chat about a patient we saw that day. Or I've connected on the phone with a faculty member who's had a memorable patient response in their physical exam that day. It's been some of these moments where I've drawn a clinical pearl or two, which has in some small way added to what has and continues to make me into the clinician I'm today. So this season, I'm catching my guests after they've had a typical day in the clinic or in their work, and we're using the natural course of the day to be the content we can draw from, to take something small away and use as further knowledge or inspiration or motivation, or just to put things back into perspective on the ride home. Don't worry, we'll keep our eyes on the road and our hands on the wheel and just have a discussion. So buckle up with us and tag along. This episode is brought to you by Therapha. Therapha is a front-end patient intake digital platform to obtain a great portion of the medical history and pertinent symptom history from your patient. Think of it like when your colleague gives you the lowdown on a patient, a summary of all the relevant information and not bothering you with what's not important. Imagine if you had a colleague take the history for you. Something like, okay, you're about to walk in on a 70-year-old female. She's a preschool teacher and walks 1 mile 3 days a week. She's got a 3-week history of right hip and thigh pain to the knee with no leg paresthesia. She says it came on for no reason and no other medical workup. She does notice a loss of motion and function when her pain is worse, and it's worsened with walking, especially after prolonged sitting. You get the drift. In other words, it's like having a digital assistant to help you get to the heart of the matter a little quicker, so you know where you need to ask a layer or two deeper of questions and where to invest the time in the physical exam. In my opinion, after using Therapha for several months, it's ideal for the busy clinic where time is of the essence. Right now, Sinju, the CEO and founder of Therapha, has a super generous deal only for MCF listeners. You get the first 2 months, full access, totally free. Just go to therapha.com/join/MCF. This episode is also brought to you by Atlas Health. Atlas Health is a web-based exercise and education delivery system tailor-made for those of us who use specific in-range repeated movements. Have you ever had a patient return from a follow-up and realize that they've been doing the wrong exercise for almost a week? Have you ever thought there's got to be a better way? Well, let me introduce you to Atlas Health. Atlas Health provides animated exercise, research-supported education, and crystal-clear instructions, all on a digital platform and sent right to your patients through email and text with no app required. This will ensure patients perform exercises correctly and understand why they're doing them right from the start. By reducing misunderstandings and heading off forgetfulness, you'll reduce wasted visits and lost time, making your practice more efficient and productive. Feel confident about what you're sending to your patients with Atlas Health. If Atlas Health is new to you and you need to see a demo first, go to atlashealthx.com. Right now, just for MCF listeners, you can use the code ATLASMCF25 for immediate access and a free trial up to 25 patients. You'll find that at atlashealthx.com/MCF. You won't find that offer anywhere else. So if you want to take advantage, again, the code is ATLASMCF25, and it's at atlashealthx.com/MCF. All right, let's get on with today's guest, Jonathan Strychasz. He's a PT, credentialed in MDT, a National Director of Physical Therapy for Marathon Health. Come along with us on the ride home. So super excited to kick off season 14. We've had an episode or two, but this one, the next episode with Mr. Jonathan Strychasz. Jonathan, thanks so much for taking time on your drive home today.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Excited to be here.
Keep your eyes on the road, though, because I don't want you having an accident while we're driving here.
Will do.
Yeah. All right. Jonathan, our idea was just to kind of talk shop a little bit on the drive home or at the end of the day, that type of thing. Tell us before we jump into some conversations of topics that you've been confronted with, that you're currently dealing with in your role with your work that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about where you are and just your career, just in a nutshell, a few sentences about what's led you up to what you're doing now.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'm a physical therapist of 25 plus years now. Started off in a huge orthopedic surgeon owned clinic just as a staff PT right out of college. I know there's some people who will say that's maybe not the best place to be, physician to own, but in retrospect, I learned a ton orthopedically. It was great. I got to sit hand in hand with surgeons, read MRIs, be in surgeries, do some post-op care, wound management, be the first point of contact post-operatively for these folks. So really kind of they empowered the PTs to really kind of manage some of that. So at the end of the day, it probably became what it was, which is a mill. So, it was time to move along from there. And I ended up starting my own private practice. And I'm located here in Cleveland, Ohio, and started with one clinic, grew it to 4 clinics in the suburbs of Northeast Ohio for about 12 years of my career. And that's where my MDT passion came along. I realized being and treating all post-ops is one thing, but when you're in a clinic and have to drive business, you really need to drive outcomes. And got exposed to MDT from one of the therapists that worked with me in my private practice. Went through the certification process. I think I've been certified now for 14 years. I think it's been that long now. So, did my private practice for 12 years, frankly, got burned out. Fee for service is somewhat of a broken model, as we all know. It just got harder and harder to compete. I'm in a very aggressive market here in Cleveland with the Cleveland Clinic sitting in my backyard. And even though I thought we provided great care, it's just hard. It was hard. So got burned out. And I currently, for the past 5 years, have been with a company called Marathon Health. And we are basically a company that provides on-site direct primary care and integrated primary care to employers. So we engage with employers to put clinics on site, near site, kind of a network model, some virtual care. And really our main bread and butter is direct primary care. So access to primary care, whether that's an MD, an NP, or a PA. And then the employers have the opportunity and option to buy up physical therapy, behavioral health coaching, to really have that full integrated model. And over the past 3 years, I've served as the National Director of Physical Therapy in our MSK service lines here at Marathon Health. So that's kind of my journey as a clinician and where I've gone and where I've come from. And it's been a great ride.
Yeah, excellent. Well, you and I have known each other for a little while and kind of kept in touch, and I've seen some things pop up with opportunities with your company. It always seemed a little intriguing. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the model itself and kind of what you've learned through that process. So tell me, naturally, or in a typical day at the end of the day, what are you doing on your way home? Are you stopping for a milkshake on the way home? Or are you
Well,
listening
definitely
to
not
music?
definitely not stopping at the bar. But no. In all seriousness, ride to and from work is generally my quiet time. So oftentimes I'm not doing anything. I use my morning commute to call my mom. I know that sounds,
Awesome.
sappy, but that's my time to connect with my mom, and I value that time, even if it's 10, 15 minutes. And my dad, so that's blessed to have my parents still around, so that's cool. And on the drive home, believe it or not, I do pop on the mechanical care forum in case
Oh, yeah.
conversations.
Well, I
So,
have to slip you a 20
so
for
I'll
saying that,
give you a cheap plug on that. So great to have access to that. But no, seriously, it's a great learning tool for me. I was just traveling for work and had to do a 3-hour drive, and I listened to, I think, 2 or 3 case conversations on that drive. So it was good stuff. So.
Yeah, well, again, I'll have to buy a drink in Tallahassee or something for that unashamedly plug there. So, well, tell us a little bit about this week, just off the top of your head. What's in your mind? What's happening with the profession and the business, and what you're doing with Marathon that you've been confronted with, that you've been thinking about, that you're having to deal with this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and maybe it's the past 5 years, but this is a typical week and nothing's different. But I think for me, so just clear, full awareness, I'm still in the clinic 50% of my time. So I'm still treating patients clinically 2 10-hour days a week. We take care of 2 unions here in Cleveland, Ohio. Great, great clientele, hardworking people who, I think the unique thing for me is over the past 5 years and working with my population is understanding their hesitancy to engage in medical services. And really, I think it paints a picture across, as you start looking in retrospect, the crisis we face with our healthcare economy in general, right? People are either afraid to access care for many reasons. A lot of it, and I've found in my experience, they've been burned financially. So they've sought care, not got the outcome they expected, and out a lot of money with no results, right? Or perhaps they were told something and it didn't work for them, and they just don't trust the medical community anymore. So for me, every day when I go into the office, it's about building trust with my population that I service. And it's unique because I have a specific population that can come see me and utilize my service, right? But understanding their hesitancy and being able to build that trust and bridge that gap has really probably been one of the coolest things I've seen over the past 5 years. And I think that morphs into everything we do on a day-to-day basis as a clinician, whether it's a population we service or the patient in front of us. We have to gain their trust. And a lot of the people, I think that, especially in our line of work as MDT clinicians, have perhaps had care elsewhere that hasn't gone the way that patient wanted it or anticipated. And then we kind of have to sell ourselves and earn their trust that this is maybe a different methodology, and we have to explain how we're going to do things differently and how that looks. And for a lot of people, they've never even been explained how they're going to be examined, right? They've never had the opportunity for a clinician to say, hey, this is how I'm going to set up my physical exam. We're going to collect some baselines. We're going to, test your cervical spine if it's your shoulder and recheck your shoulder baselines to see if they've changed. And this is how we know perhaps it's coming from your cervical spine versus your shoulder. And if it's not, we'll move down to your shoulder. And then I have to read the patient. And if they say, hey, listen, I'm not here for my neck, don't touch my, okay, then we'll start at your shoulder. Like, I think that's really been probably the coolest thing over the past 5 years. And every day I go into the clinic and learn from a patient. And I think after 25 years, every day I'm learning from every single patient that walks through my door, which is really cool. But really the biggest point I take home every day is I have to go into my clinic and build trust with the person sitting in front of me. And if I can build that trust and bridge that gap, they may go tell someone on their job site, hey, this guy's okay, go check him out. Hey, don't go run to ortho, see John first, right? And that to me, when I start to see that trickle the door, now we see it a lot over the past 5 years. And we've grown my clinic to where we have, 2 therapists now. We're both MDT certified, and we kind of practice a very similar pathway. So it's been really cool to see that and watch that grow.
So can you describe a little bit more about the model that you're in, just so listeners can understand that a little bit different, because you're speaking from a different perspective slightly, and maybe that's not as clear to someone listening.
Yeah, for sure. So we're really in basically employer-sponsored healthcare. It's a very different model. It's not a fee-for-service model. So a very significant amount of employers across the nation have recognized that an exceptional benefit that they can provide, and actually sets them apart from other industries, is can we provide access to healthcare for our employees, right? Healthcare access is a huge problem in the US, right? Especially from a primary care standpoint. There's more and more primary care physicians leaving the primary care profession, right? From burnout, lack of pay, high student loans, multitude of reasons, right? So the amount of primary care physicians to the, our population in the US is significantly, there's a huge gap, right? So employers realize that, number one, we need access to primary care. And number two, healthcare spend is huge. And that's one of the biggest drivers of cost that we have, right? So if we can have better access to healthcare on-site, near-site, and reduce barriers to care, that's going to lead to a healthier workforce, a more productive workforce, less employee turnover, and all these things that employers are looking for, right? So that's our model of care. We put primary care on site or near site, so either in the building, within 10, 15 miles of the building. We start with primary care. That's our first core service that's offered to these employers. Some employers choose to buy up physical therapy because their MSK spend's really high and they understand physical therapy will help reduce that spend, right? Some choose to buy up behavioral health first because they have a strong need for mental health, right? And some, like the clinic I am at, we have everything. We have the whole suite of services: PT, behavioral health, health coaching, primary care. Our unions believe that you have to treat the whole person, and really managing the whole person physically, mentally, from a primary care standpoint is really important. And that integrated model is really cool to be embedded in as well. And that's been a game changer for me as well. So most of our employers, they don't charge their employees to use our services. If they do, it's very low cost, 20, $25. The site I'm at, all services done within the walls of the health center are free of charge. So primary care, physical therapy, behavioral health, we have a full-on lab, we have a small pharmacy. All that is basically free healthcare to the union members, their families, and their children.
So who pays the bill, John?
Yeah, the unions do, right? So the employer does, right? So it's kind of a fixed fee model, right? So they pay an X dollars on an annual fee to have those provider types there. Like the pharmacy stuff is passed through, all the labs are passed through. And then the unions pay that, and that's a benefit for their employees, or the employer pays that, and that becomes a benefit for their employees.
And has Marathon proposed this to the unions because it's more cost effective, because it's keeps people healthier, because it's more efficient?
All the above. So when we start seeing engagement, and usually it's once we see about 50% of member engagement, we start to see significant cost savings on their healthcare spend. So they'll see, either their spend flatline, which for a lot of employers, if they have a flatline spend year over year, that's a huge win for them, right? Like a huge win. But we have a lot of employers where we've seen a downward trend in their spend. If we have engagement, and that's the big thing. And that's where that trust and bridging the gap is, bringing those people into the center. We need to have them come in if we're going to drive that ROI and have meaningful health change and meaningful lifestyle change. And that's the thing, like our model of care is very different. It's all one-to-one care. You get time with any of our provider type. And it's different because it's so integrated with primary care, our musculoskeletal model. Like primary care, you go to the hospital or you go to Joe Primary Care. If you get 15 minutes with your primary care, you're lucky, right? Our physicals last in 40 minutes. Our sick visits are 30 minutes. Our providers have the ability to do health coaching. They allow our PTs to go through a health. So I've become a board certified health and wellness coach, which is another really kind of game changer for me as far as lifestyle modification and motivational interviewing and things like that. So we have the opportunity to spend time with people, which in and of itself, when you can start to have time to listen to people and let them talk and give them an opportunity to speak and be heard, huge game changer from a trust factor. A lot of people just feel like they haven't ever gone to a provider that has listened to them because they feel rushed, right? In our model of care, we believe that being heard, listening, understanding their problem, in MDT, the history is the most important thing, right? That's where we gain all our information from, and the patient will tell us all their answers for the most part, right? They just don't know they have the answers, right?
Right.
But if we have time to parse that out and listen to them, it allows us to set up our physical exam so much better, right? And we can really hone in and funnel things down. So having that time in our space, in the MSK space, has really been huge for my practice and to help drive better outcomes and build that patient trust, right? So that's kind of a key factor for us as well. It's having the time, being able to listen to people, and really understand their whole health. I think, you and I have talked about this in the past. In our model of care from a PT perspective, we're another gateway to the primary care. So we leverage direct access to PT. They don't have to see our provider to see us. However, our physical therapists are really tuned into the primary care needs of the patient as well. So, we're doing BP screens on every patient that walks through the door as a PT. We're asking them when their last annual physical was. When's the last time they've had labs done? Are you diabetic? If you're diabetic, when have you had your A1C check last? I don't know. Do you take your meds regularly? I haven't had my meds refilled in 3 months. I think as we look and research starts to come out too, like those people with metabolic syndrome, have bigger likelihood of having an MSK problem and how that metabolic syndrome influences MSK problems. And I think specifically when we get into the realm of, NEOA, HIP-OA, things like that are true HIP-OA and true NEOA. If we have someone who has unmanaged metabolic disease, that's going to strongly influence their pain perception, right? And their pain levels. We know that. I mean, that's just there, So I think in our space, the PTs that we, when we hire a PT on, we want to make sure they have a really good understanding of primary care needs as well, because we want to be that gateway to get them engaged with our primary care. If I can gain trust with a patient, okay, I can convince them that primary care is not a bad thing. And understanding how healthy or unhealthy you are is actually a good thing. And because if we understand that you are unhealthy, let's work as a team in combination, because we want the patient to be a part of their journey. It's not us dictating the care. We want the patient to be, if they feel engaged as in part of their journey, they're going to be better able to self-manage their condition. And that's any condition. That's a chronic condition, diabetes, hypertension, a musculoskeletal condition. What do we do in MDT? We empower our patients to self-manage their condition. How do we do that? We show them cause and effect, right? We try to find that on day 1, day 2, a cause and effect. We collect baselines. We see if we can change their baselines so they get buy-on. It's no different than our primary care team, right? How are you? What's blocking you from making a lifestyle change? Is it time? Is there something else going on in life? Maybe there is. I mean, this past week, I had a great case of that, of what's blocking someone. And how do we help that patient? Had nothing to do with their MSK problem and everything to do with something that was blocking them.
Yeah, give us that little story if you can, just in a nutshell.
Yeah, for sure. I had a patient of mine. She's been coming to see me for multitude of hours. Great patient, gets what we're trying to sell. And she basically came in. She had plantar fasciitis in the past, and it was truly in a kind of a contractile dysfunction, nothing out of the ordinary. She got better with remodeling, kind of came back. She didn't reach out to ortho. She didn't go to podiatrist. She reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I come see you again?" I said, "Yeah, please." And that's the other thing. Like, I think we talk about people re-engaging for MSK care in the community. How do we keep those people from going back, right? Well, we establish a good relationship with them and they become our first point of contact. So long story short of this, she comes in, we start talking, starts crying. And I'm like, this is odd. Like, plantar fasciitis shouldn't, trust me, this is not the person who would do that. And she's like, it's been a bad week. Like, well, let's talk about your week. The foot will come. Like, we can fix that. That's no big deal. She's been going through some stuff. Yeah, and I don't want to get into it too in depth, but she's been going through some stuff, and she needed a medical procedure done to work on something else. And the medical community wasn't helping her at all. She was kind of on a time frame to get some things done, and she couldn't get in anywhere for a test she needed to get in. And I said, you know what? Again, it's luck. I've been in the Cleveland community for 25 years. I've developed a network of people I know, just like you, if you've been somewhere for a while. A good friend of mine happens to be the president of one of the hospitals here in Cleveland. So I reached out to him and I said, I need a favor. This person needs a test. They haven't been able to get in. And we got her in today. And this was last Wednesday when I saw her. So she got in today for the test. She was originally scheduled for this test 7 weeks down the road. Game changing for this patient because of the sensitivity of the test and what she needed, right? Did I care about her foot? She actually didn't. I mean, I think we spent 15 minutes on her foot, but she walked out of there happy. She's coming back for obviously her foot care, but more importantly, she felt hurt. She was struggling mentally with this, and we were able to provide that because of but I couldn't order the test she needed. So I had to reach out to our primary care team, who happens to be, right next door to me, talk to the PA ordered the test. We were good to go. Referral was placed. So like, that's the model of care that I live in, which is fantastic. Like, I wouldn't have that success and understood that if I didn't live in the model of care I live in.
Yep. Hey, Don, that's an awesome description and illustration of what can happen when you've got a network of people, when you got a team of people that are kind of collegially working with patients as a whole patient, right? Not just in our silos, as we've heard it kind of mentioned like that before. But no system and no model is perfect. Where even within that type of setting, where you do have probably more expedient ways to get patients from one discipline to another, where is it still missing and where are there pain points for a clinician and a clinician trying to do the best for their patients? Are there?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I happen to have a connection at a hospital. First of all, does every one of our therapists in our network have that or our PA have that? No, absolutely not. And I'm unique because I sit in Cleveland with two major healthcare systems, one of the biggest ones in the country at the Cleveland Clinic. And we have a competing system, university hospital system, which is a great system as well. But the problem with that is there's so much darn competition amongst those two systems. And they're great systems. Like if I had heart problems, I would want to go to the Cleveland Clinic. But would I be able to get an appointment at the Cleveland Clinic tomorrow, the next day? No, it may take 6, 8 weeks, you know? So even though, and we got lucky with this one, that example I gave you, honestly, got lucky. And I had a resource I could tap into, right? So it doesn't happen all the time that way. So there's certainly gaps, and there's gaps in getting referrals coordinated and care coordination. I think that's a struggle everybody deals with. And the unfortunate thing that I feel in the healthcare system, communication is key amongst disciplines, right? And at the end of the day, whether we're an MD, a PA, a PT, a chiropractor, insert your provider profession there. We're all on the same playing field in that we're trying to help patients. Until we all can recognize that and understand that communication is key, like I should be able to call a physician up at the Cleveland Clinic and they should want to talk to me if I'm managing one of their patients. But the stark reality is that doesn't happen, right? Mm-hmm. Now, in my setting, if I can keep things internally, I can walk next door and talk to my PA if we're co-managing a patient. But in the grand scheme of things, if I'm dealing with an orthopedic surgeon that I don't know or a referral into me that I don't know, I'm relying on a paper note to get to them, and they don't even understand. They're not going to understand my language, but I could easily articulate my language if they would pick up the phone and talk with me for 3 minutes, But that doesn't happen, unfortunately. And that's, I think, one of the problems of our healthcare system in general.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm going to interrupt here just for a quick mention. Check out Case Conversations with interesting, challenging actual patient cases brought by seasoned veteran clinicians, a wide range of topics, pathologies, classifications, scenarios. Jonathan, you already mentioned this that you've tapped into. Recently, we highlighted a topic of 2 shoulder patients. Didn't have pain, but they had inability to raise their arm with Scott Herbawi. Scott walked us through how he differentiated the spine versus the extremities. Important classification and important management aspects. So if you wish you had more exposure to people like Scott Herbawi and other seasoned veterans, check out Case Conversations. It's at mechanicalcareforum.com. All right, so tell us, Jonathan, a patient that you've had recently where you kind of hit a roadblock. You hit either a challenge with classification, a challenge with, okay, the patient's 50% better, but then plateaus or gets worse. Do you have one in mind that comes to your mind? Or maybe not. Maybe you just get them all well.
No, I don't get them all well. That's for sure. I promise you that. I'm just trying to figure out where my biggest roadblock was. I kind of have one now. I do, as a matter of fact. So yeah. So interestingly enough, I obviously not all of our clinicians across our book of business are mechanically trained or MDT trained. I believe we're working on trying to get as many as we can trained. But I do have some people that are on the pathway to getting certified, and I have 3 certified right now, myself and 2 others, my one here in Cleveland, and then Will, who's done actually a case conversation with you.
Yeah.
Fogarty, out of Charlotte, on the Disney patient. So he's in our Charlotte network. So the cool thing is, the 3 of us, it's nice to have those resources to bounce ideas off. But long story short, I have a patient who really came in with just typical right low back pain. Like nothing fancy, no radiculopathy, no weakness, no neurological signs and symptoms, no slump testing positive, just no mechanism of injury, just no apparent reason came in. He's been, I think it started like 5 weeks ago. And really his only baseline was he has right low back pain, and he was already getting better by the time he saw me. Unfortunately, we're really busy where I'm at, so it takes like 3 to 4 weeks. So sometimes natural history is already taking over by the time they get to see me, which is good. So, and I actually use that like, hey, you're already better. That's a good sign. Like that means your body's doing its job. And this is generally what would happen anyway. So So he was already getting better. I think I saw him 4 weeks into his episode of pain. So, day one, his really only baseline was he was limited into extension, but it wasn't like a huge roadblock or major block into extension. He had some pain with left side glide, but it was not obstructed. His right side glide was full and pain-free, which was interesting considering he had right-sided low back pain. So take him through my assessment day one. He seems to respond pretty well in the clinic to repeated extension and lying. Repeated extension and lying was self-generated overpressure. We get some improvement as an extension range of motion when he stands back up. And his left side glide, this is where I failed though on visit one. He said it was better, but I think in reality, he was like, oh yeah, it's better, but it was like 2%, 10% better, not better what you and I would think is better, right? Mm-hmm. So lesson learned on that. So anyways, I sent him home with that. He's really compliant. He's a good patient. He does it 6-7 times a day. He comes back. He's like, I'm worse. Like, okay, well, that's good. That tells us something. I'm thinking, okay, he's worse with extension. Maybe we have a relevant lateral component here. I need to start exploring this. So we end up doing a bunch of side glides to the right side to see if that changes. And again, his only really painful baseline is still left side glide. That produces his typical pain, not really obstructed, extension, slight obstruction. And at this point, because of his age, I'm not even really sure if it was obstructed or that was just his amount of extension range of motion, right? So we test right side glide. We do a bunch of reps. We do some sustained right side gliding. Nothing changes. His left side glide is still painful. So I said, okay, let's flip it around. In fact, I had this conversation with, well, I've never seen anybody in my years of doing this, and I've probably missed a few, I'm sure, who responded to side gliding away from their pain. But we tried it, and I don't even know why I tried it. Oh, I know why I tried it. He's like, well, maybe I need to stretch that side out. So he believed like he felt he needed to do that. So, and at this point, I want to make sure I got buy-in because I'm like, I made him worse after the first visit, but we talked through that. But I want to make sure, I don't want to lose it, right? So he does a bunch of left side gliding. It's produce no worse, produce no worse, produce no worse. We get off the wall. And I left side glide him, and he's like, yeah, that feels better. Now, I learned my lesson after day one. I said, how much better? He's like, 50% better. I'm like, 50 is a pretty good number. I can live with that. Okay. So we sent him home with that. And I'm having a conversation with Will about this patient. And he's like, yeah, that's odd. I never would have gone there, John. Never would have gone there. I'm like, right. Yeah, I get it. Like, meaning like, nor would have I, but he did like one rep and he's like, maybe I need to do this. I'm like, well, we can try it. It's not going to hurt to try it, So he comes back, visit 3. This was Tuesday this week. So here we go, this week in the clinic. There you go. He comes back this week and he's like, yeah, no better, John, no better. But hey, good news, I'm not worse this time around. I'm like, okay, well, that's good. He's like, but we got to figure something out here, man. This has been 7 weeks now. I'm tired of hurting. And I go, well, you're better overall, right? He goes, yeah, but like, come on now. This is like, we got to get moving here. I'm like, okay, I get it. So I'm like, all right, we have to reboot. We have to reset. Like, we're going to take it from square one and go into a really full-blown assessment today. So, and I'm like, I like flexion. I think exposes a lot. I like to use flexion when I don't know, because I think it gives us information, right? So we flexed the hell out of him in standing. I mean, we probably did 60, 70 reps of flexion in standing. No worse with his left side glide, doesn't obstruct his extension. He doesn't really have any pain when he flexes. I lay him down. I do like 50 reps of flexion and lie. Stands back up, no change. I'm like, well, okay, flexion's not giving us. So I said, well, we've side glide you both directions. So let's try loaded extension. So I put them up over the table and we did a bunch of extension and standing, 30, 40 reps. No effect, doesn't produce any pain. He's like, doesn't bother me to do this. We retest his left side glide. He's like, John, that's pain-free. 100%. I go, like, pain-free? He's like, yeah, this feels the best. In the 3 visits we've had, I've never had no pain with this movement that you've done with me.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. I sent him home with extension and standing. So I've never, maybe never, but I'm trying to wrap my head around. So we unloaded him. It made him worse, right? Mm-hmm. We've now loaded him. And then he's in the 59, 60 age bracket. So maybe he's one of these people that needed some load when he extends.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's interesting,
So
isn't it? And you would almost expect that, okay, we're seeing centralization while doing extension and standing. That might build your confidence that, yeah, we're right.
didn't though.
Yeah, there's no pain though. Yeah.
No.
Yet his side glide's better afterwards. So how do you argue with that?
No. And to him, it was, you know how that patient's light bulb kicks and they're like, what magic just happened? Like he got it. Like he was like, this has not happened in the first 2 visits. In fact, you've done nothing for me in the first 2 visits. But the light bulb kicks. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next week when he comes back. But so yeah, that was kind of an intriguing one, an interesting one. You know, I've had a really cool patient yesterday, a new eval, has had 2-year history of knee pain. And you know, I start questioning him and, you know, about location of pain. And he's like, yeah, it's in kind of this like generalized anterior knee. And it goes all the way down my shin to my ankle. I'm like, okay. So that's interesting. So, you know, I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, the secondary XPOS study and thinking of like the indicators, you know, for XPOS and things like that. I'm like, well, that's a big one. You know, that pain in between joints.
Yeah.
And then we start talking like he had like an episode of low back pain during COVID. He needed like 4 months of chiropractic care to resolve, you know, things like that. So we ended up, you know, spending a lot of time on his lumbar spine, and he had an extremely painful squat and he could not step down from a stair without severe pain in his leg, mainly his knee, a little bit in his outer shin. And once we started extending him and taking him through forced progression, interestingly enough, in order to abolish his symptoms with stepping and squatting, he needed mobilization at his TL junction. So, but he was like blown away. He was like, 2 years of this and it's been my back all along, you know? And I said, well, we don't know that for sure, but certainly the response is pretty dramatic here. I mean, he went from squatting to 45 degrees to almost his butt hitting his heels. So
yeah, pretty strong baseline you had to begin with, which sets you up to really be able to expose a clear difference or a change to the patient, which again builds that buy-in like you've talked about.
Yep, 100%. So that was a cool one. Those are always fun, but you know, and then just utilizing some of that. You know, I think people always ask, well, how is research relevant to our clinical practice? Well, when you start to read studies like, you know, the secondary XPOS study and things like that, and then you start looking at those indicators and they start matching up to what you're seeing in the clinic, I think it really helps you as a clinician to better explain to your patients, like, look, we've seen this in the research and the literature. If we see this, there's a good chance it's coming from here. And this is why we should start our assessment here. We're certainly going to collect, and we did. We collected functional baselines that were meaningful to him. He's an electrician. He squats and has to kneel all day. He goes up and down thousands of steps a day, right? So it's like, John, every time I go down a step, it kills me. Every time I squat to look at an outlet or change an outlet, it kills me. So these were meaningful tests to him. And that's the other thing, like choose meaningful tests to the patient. Like, yes, range of motion for us is good and we love that stuff. But if it's not meaningful to them, you're not going to get as much buy-in.
Yep. Yeah. I hear Mark Miller saying, take me to Missouri, right? The show me state. So,
yep.
Yeah. Tell me this. You're working with some clinicians in a primary care setting that are not mechanical therapists. They've got to be somewhat in that conventional mindset of looking at pathoanatomical. Is there ever a challenge where you're like, I'm having trouble competing with these pathoanatomical labels that patients are getting or whatever? And have you had conversations? Have you made any headway? Have you had other conversations and you've not made any headway? And, you know, just because of the barriers that are there and the presuppositions or past experience and education that these clinicians are so strong in the pathoanatomical model that you got to just kind of almost agree to disagree. I mean, talk about that within your setting.
I think for me, I view it not as a barrier, but as a unique opportunity to educate. And I feel like, especially when we're talking about primary care providers, MD and PPA, I think a lot of them will openly admit they don't have a ton of MSK training, right? If you actually have an honest conversation with them, not in a threatening manner, but like, hey, what's your experience with treating musculoskeletal and how, like,
if I told you you had to manage every low back pain patient that walked through the door, how would that make you feel? And most of them are like, it'd be petrifying, it'd be horrible. And they want to learn. They want to be exposed to someone who has maybe some advanced knowledge, just like I want to learn from them. I want to learn, what do these labs mean? So when I see them in the chart, I can better understand and help talk through those labs with the patient as well, right? So they want to learn. I think, over the 5 years I've been embedded with my PA and NP, it's been fantastic because I get pulled into the room with the PA now. And early on, she did too. She'd be like, listen, can you just come in and take a look at this patient? Some of it's just like, hey, here's John. He's not a bad guy. Like, meet him. But can you take a quick peek for 5 minutes and do a quick screen on him? And they didn't know what my quick screen was. But like, if it's a shoulder pain patient, maybe it's, can you lift your arm? Ow, that really hurts. Can you reach behind? No, that can't do that. Okay, let's do some of this. And does that change? And we found that there was some low hanging fruit that just doing some simple things in the span of 2 minutes, they could move their arm a lot more. And then my PA an MP would start asking, well, how do you do that? It's now to the point where I've almost triage trained them how to do that. So they're like, she'll come to me and say, yeah, he says it's his shoulder. I'm pretty sure it's his neck. And I gave him these 2 exercises to work on because he couldn't get in with you for 3 weeks. And I go, well, how'd you figure that out? She's like, well, he could only raise his arm this high. He did this movement and then I had him do that and he could go all the way up. So it's been cool to really see that and really pull back some of the onions as far as that pathoanatomical model. And, really even with some of the PTs, like, listen, I think we can have a pathoanatomical argument. I think that's fine. I think it's good. And I think we have to look at the patient in front of us sometimes who wants that.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have that conversation with the patient. I think we have to be flexible a little bit, especially when I think over 25 years of doing this, I've become a lot more flexible. Like, I've got to understand what the patient wants and needs are. Now, I'm not going to do everything they want and need. Like, I'm not going to slap ultrasound on them or a hot patch or anything like that. But if they want to understand perhaps what's going on anatomically or pathoanatomically, I may have to have that conversation with them, and that's okay, right? And I'll preface it like, hey, this is theoretical. I'm not sure this is exactly what's going on, but certainly the way your clinical exam and how you behave physically, functionally, mechanically, symptomatically, this would indicate perhaps X, Y, or Z. And I think, you listen to Mark Laslett, he'll tell you, you can identify some things pathoanatomically based on your clinical exam. And his research, his stuff we did with Charles Averill, like that all matches, right? Like, I think they showed some pretty good results with that, right? So for me, it's a little bit patient wants, patient needs, and I have to navigate that somewhat, according to their needs and wants. But for me, from a provider standpoint, I view that conversation as an opportunity to educate. And do we really need to overcomplicate things with the pathoanatomical model? Yeah. I'm going to tell you the best thing about MDT for me, I'm stupid. I'm not very smart. So for me, the system makes sense. I can explain it very easily to the patient. And I don't have to get in the weeds of, this nerve and this muscle and that muscle. And I'm just not that smart, Jason. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, for me, it's much easier to show them you couldn't squat before you did this movement, and now you can.
Yeah.
And they may say, well, what's wrong with me? And sometimes I just say, well, are you better? And they're like, yeah, I am. Okay, that's good then, right? We're good.
Yeah, no, I get it. Sometimes you can avert those questions where you could almost say, I don't really know why you're better. But, we've heard from some who said, I would warn against saying that, because then you can almost create a little bit of a hesitation, a lack of trust in you.
Yep.
If you go down that road. Sure, if they really press, you could say, honestly, we don't know exactly what's happening, but we
Yep.
know that this kind of reaction is associated with those that do well. So,
yep.
Yeah, it's a good point. One more quick interruption here. Within our research resource, Inside the Science, we have an ever-growing collection of study summaries and discussions on papers like a couple of recent ones, the effects of specific thoracic manual techniques versus general techniques on cervical pain. That's with Steve Karras. And other papers on patellar tendinopathy with Peter Malieris, who's done a lot of work on tendinopathy. He shares best practices of differential diagnosis of tendinopathy and appropriate loading principles. So these are just a couple of examples, but if you need to do better at keeping up with literature, check out Inside the Science. That's a mechanical care forum as well. All right, last question for you is on the topic of staff. not every clinician out there is over clinicians, but you are. And so I have to believe that you've learned some things over the years of just dealing with clinicians, onboarding them, perhaps making sure that they are motivated and you're able to contribute something to help persuade them to keep pressing the envelope, but to do better for their patients. Where, sometimes we have clinicians out there, and sometimes we are the clinicians who we get a little bit lackadaisical. We're kind of just worn out. We're just going to punch clock, see some patients, go home, and do what we want to do. Or even specifics on how to manage interpersonal relationships in a clinic. So, what have you learned with guiding, leading, encouraging your staff to do their best?
Yeah, I think for me, and I think being a leader is ever evolving and you develop skills continuously, right? I'm a big believer in servant leadership. I think that's really important. No task is too small for me, whether that's me in the clinic answering a phone for my medical assistant, rooming a patient, if I have a down minute, like that to me shows that you as a leader are willing to do whatever it takes to make the patient experience as best as it can be, to drive outcomes for the patient, for your practice, whatever that looks like, right? Whatever setting you're in. And I think for me, communication, transparency, and honesty is important. I try to be transparent, as honest as I can with the therapists that work with me. No one works under me. I don't believe that. I feel like we're all on a level playing field. I'm really there to support them. I want them to be successful. To me, that's the most important thing. I want you to be successful. And I ask them, what does success look like to you? Does success look like you like a full patient schedule, driving good outcomes, learning more, growth, professionally in our company? What does that look like to you? And I think that's important to understand, and then understand how they like to receive feedback. That's important. Some people want feedback a little softer. Some people are just like, be blunt, tell me what it is. Some people, they don't want to be micromanaged. So, I have some that like, hey, listen, John, I'll come in, see patients, drive outcomes, just leave me alone. Perfect. If you're doing that, I'm leaving you alone. I'm letting you go to town. And some people want extra help and extra support. Like, I'm not sure how to drive engagement. What are some ideas that you're doing? So we're spread out. We have about 80 musculoskeletal providers nationwide. I think for me, it's keeping them connected too, like feeling that sense of connection, and ability to learn from each other. Like we all have a little variety of backgrounds. We're not all MDT trained, but I have some great pelvic floor physical therapists, who I actually just leverage because I have a pregnant female I'm working with now who's having pelvic floor issues. Now, I'm not going to do anything internally, but I can certainly leverage her skill set to better understand my patient's problem, right? So we get together once a month for a variety of reasons virtually. So we do kind of a quarterly meeting once a quarter where we talk about, what does our growth look like? What are our metrics for the quarter from an outcome standpoint, things like that, engagement standpoint, utilizations as a group, right? We have a quarterly meeting. It's our journal club meeting. So we do case presentations, we do journal reviews. So, a therapist will raise their hand and say, hey, I'd love to present on this topic. I presented a unique case that responded, a cervical case that responded honestly to flexion and rotation. So like weird, right? So like, how did I get there? What was my critical thinking to get from, someone with a right cervical radiculopathy with tricep weakness, and he ended up abolishing his tricep weakness with flexion and rotation. How did I get there? How did I make that? We review journal articles. And then once a quarter, we have an engagement strategy meeting where we get all our clinicians together. What's working for you at your clinic? What are you doing differently? I'm going out on the line and in my manufacturing facility, and I'm meeting with people while they're working, introducing myself, asking, hey, do you have any problems? Do you having any issues? Yeah, I am. Oh, I didn't even know I could see the therapist. Well, come see me, So really kind of leveraging each other's skill sets and ideas to grow our business, to drive engagement, which helps drive outcomes, which is ultimately what we're there for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I know it's lots of plates spinning, right? You got to keep going in a position that you're in with seeing your own caseload, plus, thinking about things down the pipe in the future, where are you headed? And then, of course, managing folks and being there to support your staff. So Listen, I appreciate you driving home, and then you George Jetsons yourself to all of a sudden in your house. So way to go on that. I've got to figure
Yeah,
that
it was
out.
impressive, right?
It's amazing.
Technology at its finest, Jason.
Yeah. I've had my hands all over, not on the wheel too, driving here. So,
It's amazing.
we're both
I've seen the same car drive by like 4 times too.
Well,
It's
sometimes
cool.
I like to just run
Oh,
circles a little bit. Just yeah, I'm involved in the conversation. So anyway, Jonathan, thanks for taking a little time at the end of your day, giving a little bit of experience that you've had in your unique role. We appreciate you taking a little time and joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, and I appreciate everything you've done for, MDT and, us out there kind of on our island sometimes, and being able to have this and leverage as a resource is great. So appreciate you as well.
And there you go with episode 404 with Jonathan Strychasz. I love the diversity we have to draw from within our colleagues, and Jonathan certainly has some unique experience. Collaboration with medical and allied health colleagues. We hear it often. To make a large impact, we need to collaborate with others outside of our immediate circles. If 50% could adopt utilization of services within an employer-sponsored program, Jonathan and his employer have seen a significant cost savings. And teach cause and effect. Set those baselines, choose an informed loading strategy, and retest. Make sure the patient understands what you're doing and sees what they're experiencing. And if you've got a staff, including other clinicians, work with the attitude that no job is too small or insignificant being a servant leader. Don't forget about our sponsors, Atlas Health, a more precise and professional way to deliver exercise and education to your patients. If you use end-range repeated movements in sustained positions, and you teach patients to test and retest their motion, and if you're still using pictures from Google, hand-drawn figures, or even your patient's phone, welcome to the 21st century and get your first 25 patients free exclusively here at MCF. Go to atlashealthx.com/MCF. Click to sign up and enter the information and code ATLASMCF25. And Therapha. If you could use a better way to intake your patients, gather the relevant information before the patient arrives, and make you more efficient, check out Therapha and take advantage of this generous offer of 2 months free. You'll find that special deal at therapha.com/join/MCF. All right, thanks for coming along on the ride with us today with me and Jonathan. Be sure to come back next week and hang out with our next guest on the ride home for more of sharing experience for improved patient care.